For my artifact, I chose the last spike of the Canadian Pacific Railway. The last spike, historically for Canada, is significant in many different ways. My presentation will link the last spike to the 6 units that we covered in this course. Some units are more closely linked to the last spike, and some units are symbolically linked. The last spike was the last spike that was nailed into the CPR, and it signified the completion of the Canadian Pacific Railway. The geographical significance is that the ceremony took place at Craigellachie near Eagle Pass in the interior of BC at an elevation of 400 meters above ground. The last spike was driven into the terrain through the track as many prominent figures of the railway and Canadian government watched. In the construction of the spikes, there were iron in material, and about 30 million were used along the landscape of Canada. Along the track, there is a river called Eagle River and a mountain named Rectitude Peak. The last spike's connection to geography is its actual location in Canada and the terrain and region to which it was nailed into. The area of Craigellachie is the landmark in which my artifact was used to complete the railway. The Industrial Revolution was a period where there was a shift from an economy reliant on agriculture to the building of steam engines, manufacturing of goods, and in relation to the last spike, construction of transportation systems through railways. The Industrial Revolution brought on the development of the Canadian Pacific Railway. In 1871, when the Second Industrial Revolution was just beginning, BC decided to join Canada if only the government of Canada promised to build a transcontinental railway going across Canada. The engineering was completed on November 7, 1885, during the period of the Industrial Revolution, when the last spike was driven into the ground. It was finished 6 years ahead of schedule. When the last spike finished, the Canadian Pacific Railway, it had a huge role in supporting immigration across the country to help transport goods and workers. Therefore, an important connection of the Industrial Revolution and the CPR to the last spike is that the construction and completion of the railway resulted in a huge population spike in BC, which helped further support the economy. The fur trade in Canada brought in many settlers from all across Europe. The last spike also allowed many settlers to come and open businesses across the country. Although the last spike and the fur trade do not have much in common, both were instrumental in supporting the exchange of goods throughout Canada. The last spike allowed goods to reach BC. These points are important to my artifact because they connect and relate to it through the exchange of materials and trade. The last spike symbolized unity and promoted nationalism because it linked the country from coast to coast. Like the last spike, the establishment of the Canadian Confederation unified the colonies under one political system. Sir John A. Macdonald, one of the fathers of Confederation, envisioned a transcontinental railway connecting his country from east to west. The last spike was the completion of his railway, and it helped solidify the Confederation of Canada. The Confederation and all of these facts connect to my artifact because it states what the last spike did for the Confederation of Canada and how it fulfilled Sir John A. Macdonald's vision of a railway and a unified country. Symbolically, the Treaty of Paris is similar to the last spike because both signified the end of a process where it led to positive outcomes of unification, peace, and trade. The Treaty of Paris was signed to end the American wars with the British, providing peace across America. The last spike ended the construction of the railway and provided unity across Canada. Another similarity is the American Revolution helped the economy by opening new trade relations and markets. The completion of the CPR with the last spike also allowed trade to be facilitated between the west and east of Canada. This information is important to my artifact because it shows the similarities between the Treaty of Paris and the last spike and how they both helped in unity, peace, and trade relations with their countries. The last spike was significant to British Columbia's history in many ways. Not only was the last spike planted in the soil of BC, but it also increased transportation into the province. It had ties to the hard-working Chinese Canadians working in BC and had connections to the gold rush which happened in the mid-1800s. With the implantation of the last spike in BC, movement across the country and into and out of the BC became inexpensive and convenient with the railway being finished. A dark historical significance of the last spike was that the Chinese Canadian workers that were responsible for most of the construction of the railway in BC were left out of the last spike ceremony in 1885. Approximately 15,000 Chinese Canadian laborers worked on the CPR, working in difficult conditions, long hours, and with little pay. They were left out of any deserved recognition during the ceremony of the last spike. Lastly, the last spike and the completion of the CPR had connections to the gold rush. During the Fraser Canyon War in the early 1800s, gold was mostly be transported by hand or water navigation. The last spike opening the CPR allowed materials like gold to be transported faster and more efficiently.